This interview is a part of a series that we have this year looking at the question, what is design? And this is the second event. The third event will be March 11th, a Monday, so mark that down on your calendar. We'll have Felicia Ferrone, an industrial designer, talk about her perspective of design. And also, I should mention, feel free to get up for seconds if you're still hungry. But the food smells great, so I was telling Chef Kim that we cannot invite a chef and have pizza as the main event, so for the lunch, excuse me. So Chef Edward Kim studied at the Pasadena Le Cordon Bleu school. He trained in restaurants in New York City and Los Angeles before returning back to Chicago, where he is a native. He's had 3 restaurants in Chicago, Ruxbin, Mott Street, and Mini Mott, and we'll get into some of the restaurants in a few minutes. In 2017, Chef Kim was named as a semifinalist for the James Beard Best Chef Award in the Great Lakes. His restaurant also in 2017 received a Michelin Bib Gourmand recognition for Chicago. Okay, so first I wanted to start with a brief question about your connection to the law. So as I read from your biography, you wanted to go to law school after studying at NYU, but eventually became a chef. So
that's correct.
What exactly happened on the way to law school?
Well, I don't want to dissuade anybody from going to law school, so. But for me, I had some friends who were lawyers that were a little bit older. I had a close friend who was working for the SEC, and I just found that as I got closer to studying for the LSAT, getting ready to go to law school, that they had lamented and commented that they had wished that they had taken a couple years before going into law school. And so as I got closer to that, their voices became a little bit louder in my ears, and I decided to take a few years off and get some, quote, life experience before going into law school.
Yeah, well, that's great advice for prospective students as well. I mean, it's something that we actually commonly will tell students or prospective students, that make sure you really want to go become a lawyer before you go to law school. So that's great, and Chicago has benefited from your choice. Now, maybe if you could just describe briefly what's it like being a chef in Chicago? Okay.
I think, so a lot of you guys have probably watched Food Network and been shown like the artistic aspect of it. Being a chef is very much a blue-collar job. It is, so to the, my parents were horrified when I went into cooking, because they came here to hopefully provide a life where I would have more of a white-collar job, and I was going into a job that was very much blue-collar, working with my hands. So I work long hours, not that lawyers don't work long hours, but we work about, our professor, you were asking me what my hours were like. Usually a 12-hour shift. We try to work 5 to 6 days a week, so 60 to 72 hours a week. There's a lot of working with your hands, working with heavy objects. I often comment to new hires when I bring them out to the back of the lot and our dumpster's too full and we're jumping on it together. Like, this is the sexy stuff that you don't see on television. But so it's long hours, hard work, but at the same time, it's stuff that I really enjoy doing. I know that you're asking, one of the reasons why I didn't go to law school was that I realized that I really enjoyed working with my hands. I really enjoyed the craft aspect of it. And so I had friends who were artists in New York. I enjoy painting as well, and they were much better painters than I was, and currently am. And they were struggling. And I'm like, okay, if they're struggling, there's no way I'm going to be able to make a living out of this. What can I do where I'm working with my hands and I can see right away the difference that I'm making? And so there's a lot of joy in that aspect of working it. There's a food aspect. I'm an owner as well. And so this past, I believe, Thursday, one of my greatest joys of the week was we had a plumbing issue. And figuring that out right before service, do we close down? Do we stay open? That was really, really fun for me. I went into details with my friend about that, and he thought it was horrifying. But if that's something that you're into, like being hands-on, high stress, but at the end of the day, it's also just food. Nobody's dying, so. If that's something that appeals to you, then maybe that is a profession for you.
Was this related to the polar vortex, the plumbing issue?
Probably. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we shut down for a couple days. I wanted to talk briefly about your restaurants. You founded your restaurants with your wife and also your sister Vicky, as well as a friend, I take it, a business partner. And the two restaurants that, and there's an offshoot Mini Mott, but the two restaurants, you first started Ruxbin in 2011, and then Mott Street, which is the current one, the main one that you still have open, is from 2013 you opened that. Now, is it fair to say that Ruxpin was more fine dining and Mott Street more casual? Is that a fair characterization of it? Okay, so walk us through the origin, the idea of how you went from fine dining to open up, in addition, the more casual restaurant, and then now focusing basically on the casual restaurant as the restaurant that you have open. Okay.
Well, when we first opened Ruxbin, it was with my sister and now my wife. One of the things that I realized working this profession was that it takes you get to do what you love, but you often are taken away from the people that you love. And so I try to have my cake and eat it too and roll all of that together, like work with the people that I love and then be able to spend a lot of time at my job as well. With Ruxpin, a lot of our success, I think, can be attributed to ignorance. We went in there knowing what we wanted to build, but not knowing how difficult it would be. We wanted to just open a casual neighborhood restaurant. My experience had always been in fine dining and in establishments that had millions of dollars, $1 million kitchens. And I would call my friends, my mentors, and say, is this even possible with what we were doing? They would say they believed in me. And when we went to an accountant and asked them what we should be doing, they said that we should get out of our lease. You know, we did it with, I think our starting capital was $90,000, which is very small for a restaurant. Out of that $90,000, we only ended up spending $60,000 to build it out. Yeah, we were very lucky. When we first opened it, we didn't take any reservations. People were wondering why we didn't take reservations, and that's because we were afraid that nobody would even show up. But we kept pushing, and the only thing I knew was that we were successful because I was working very hard. My partners were working really hard. And as that happened, the food got more and more complicated, a little bit, reached a higher and higher level. And so we became fine dining. From there, after a few years, we were thinking of our staff, because it's such a small restaurant. And how can we retain great staff? And the only way we could do that is if we grow. Seeing what we wanted to eat afterwards, we ended up opening a restaurant that was a little bit more casual, but still super flavor forward. And that's how Mott Street came about. That's a restaurant that was the food that we wanted to eat after cooking at Ruxpin all day. And from there, we ended up opening, after a few more years, we ended up opening a mini Mott, which is even a more casual version of it, of Mott Street. With Ruxbin, after year 7, we ended up closing that down because I had a child and I wanted to spend some time with it. Well, not with it, with my child, with my daughter.
Your family.
And my wife would kill me if she heard that. But with fine dining and how small of an establishment is, your margins, I would have to be there for a very long periods of time. Like in our closing, we were fully booked, and I would find myself working there till I would be done working at 3 a.m. and I would have to end up going back to work before noon the next day. And so there was no time for me to see my family or my daughter. And I'm very blessed that I was in a financial situation where, okay, I can take a break from this, close it down at this moment, and still be financially able to provide for my family.
Terrific. For those of you who weren't here when Ruxpin first opened, as the chef mentioned, that there were no reservations. You'd have to get there, as soon as they opened or before, and there were usually lines. So if you weren't able to wait for an hour or more, you're out of luck. But there was a lot of buzz about this restaurant when it first opened, and I definitely was one of those people who was willing to stick it out, and it was definitely worth it. Maybe briefly, just tell us about the meaning of the names Ruxpin and Mott Street. Is there a significance to those?
Ruxpin was, so my sister and my wife wanted it to be a namesake restaurant. And I thought that was too, I had never had a restaurant of my own at that point. And so I thought it was too egotistical to name it Edwards, And
that would have been a great restaurant. I would have been in favor of that one.
And so my nickname, or growing up, I was called Teddy, right? And at that period, there was a bear called Teddy Ruxpin. And so kids would call me that to tease me. It wasn't a form of endearment. But so we thought it was a great name because it had a connotation of nostalgia as well as Americana. That's what we wanted to convey in our restaurant, but a little amorphous at the same time. I also think that opening the restaurant was very difficult given how much money we had. We had very little capital. And so there was that financial struggle aspect. There was the personal struggle aspect of coming to terms with my background and embracing Korean cuisine as well as my teaching of French cuisine. And I thought there was something really beautiful of, okay, so I take an obstacle, I overcome it, I embrace it, I realize that it's part of like what made me, right? And then I celebrate it. And so I think it's a big, it's an awesome FU in a sense to like taking that obstacle and becoming proud of it. And it's like, okay, you use this to tease me. Well, I take ownership of it now, and I'm really proud of it. And now it becomes celebrated. So that's the origin of the name Ruxpin. Mott Street, in Korean, Mott means taste. And so we were trying to do food that hits you on a visceral level, like street food. The other aspect of that is that I went to New York University, and Mott Street was where all the Chinese restaurants would be. And as a poor college student, that was one of the best places to go to eat a great meal. And so that was an homage to that as well.
Oh, that's cool. Dual meaning.
Yep.
Okay, so before we get to the food aspect of your restaurants, I thought it worth spending just a few minutes on the interior design aspect of it. Is this something that, well, just put simply, how do you come up with the ideas for the design of your restaurant? And we could just focus simply on Mott Street. Mm-hmm. So this is part of it, and this is a different part of the restaurant.
Yeah, so one of the things that you might notice right away is that there's a lot of communal tables, and so for us, that breaking down that notion of being fine dining and being a little bit more casual, enjoying each other's company. That's one of the things that we had to be a little wary of coming from Ruxbin, which was a little bit more fine dining. I think in terms, for me, what I think about when I look at people today and how we function, walking around our heads all in our smartphones and stuff, one of the few places that we can go out that I really love and where it's a communal experience is dining, going out, and it's that shared experience, kind of like watching a movie in a movie theater. It's better because of that. And so that's one of the main things that we focused on here. The other thing too is that we really wanted to communicate a utilitarian aspect of it, and so bringing out the kitchen into the restaurant as well. So at Mott, there's no basement, right? And how do we deal with storage issues? So in the other photo, you could see that we have all those cages there, and all those cages carry all of our product. It's interesting the time that we're in too, where a lot of the kitchens are open now, and we try to bring that into the restaurant too. And the customers want that holistic experience. Back in the day, if you go into older restaurants, some beautiful older French restaurants, you'll see that the kitchen is so far in the back, and they literally make corridors on purpose so that there's no way to actually see what's going on in the kitchen, because during that period of time, the guests would not want to see. That's the help. Who wants to see that, right? But now it's a different story. Now we have celebrity chefs. We have and people are interested in seeing that whole process.
And I take it you're pretty hands-on, or were hands-on with the interior design of the restaurant.
Yeah. So I mean, it was really a collaboration between all of the partners. So Vicky, my sister, my wife Jennifer, and Nate, they all had we all put in our 2 cents.
Yeah, well, it looks great. It looks great. Okay, before we get to the food, one last question on design of restaurants. I read this interesting New York Times review by Pete Wells about this concept by Lexus called Intersect, and it's a branding environment where they have cars, there were Lexus cars, but not for sale.
Okay.
And then there's also a cafe and a restaurant, and for the restaurant side of things, they're going to invite different chefs to come in and have different cuisines. I forgot the name of the current chef, but the New York Times review gave the restaurant, the food, a great review, and the interior was not as, I guess, essential to the review. But do you have any views on whether this kind of concept is one that you think might work and we might expect more of?
I think it makes sense, in terms of, especially for fine dining or any restaurant experience, you're looking to sell a certain image, right? And you're selling a fantasy in the sense where you come in there, you eat, you don't have to clean any dishes, you don't have to cook any of the food. And so it is that mini vacation. And so in terms of food, like, what is the intrinsic value of it? Like, I might have a carrot, and why does this carrot have more value than the carrot that you can find at your local grocery store? And so there is an image that we have to sell with that, and that makes sense in terms of Lexus wanting to sell their brand, and this is a luxury brand. Like, what's the difference between this Lexus and a Honda Civic? It gets me to the same place, right? What is the difference between this food and something I pick up at a fast food chain, right? They're both going to sustain me, but you have to be able to sell something to the guests that they value it enough that they're going to be able to spend 5 times more than they would on something that might get them to the same place. But there is value in luxury, being able to treat yourself, and so that makes sense to me. We have, I think, a similar restaurant in Chicago where it's the 3 Arts Cafe, and I think that's a showroom for restoration hardware, and There they don't have rotating chefs, but it's that same idea, like this is a luxurious brand, let's pair it with luxurious food. And so I think the concept makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should team up with Tesla, maybe.
If they'll give me a car, I'll definitely do it.
We'll get on the phone for that. Okay, so let's turn to the food aspect and your creation of dishes and menus. Before focusing on a dish, I wanted to just get a sense of your perspective of if you have a food kind of philosophy. The late Anthony Bourdain once wrote, "Food tells a story." It's usually a very personal one. If that's true, what story does your food tell?
I think something that our food tells, which isn't so different from so many other chefs, is that we are very insecure, you know? And so in that sense, it's like that insecurity is a great thing. It makes us always want to make our food taste better, right? And always be open to criticism. And when I say open to criticism, that doesn't mean that we don't take it hard and we might not lash back emotionally, but that at the end of the day, why are these people not enjoying it? Why is it not hitting the right note that I expected it to? The other story that I think it tells is some maturity, growth. I remember when I first started cooking, I felt really comfortable cooking French food. That's a lot of what my training was initially. Even though I grew up eating Korean food, food that my grandmother cooked for me. But I would never cook that because I had this very tight box of what this dish should taste like. But for me, also like kimchi jjigae, which is a Korean dish, or any other specific Korean dish, really needs to specifically taste like this. And it needs to taste like my grandma's. And if it doesn't taste like that, then it's bad. But if I'm making a beef Wellington that I didn't really grow up eating, or a hollandaise, then I don't have this box that I have to deal with, and all I have to worry about is it tasting good. I think one of the benefits of, and I might be going on a tangent here, but one of the benefits of being American is that we get exposed to so much different types of food, different types of cultures. I say that growing up in Chicago, like I might not have the best Korean food or the best French food. The best Korean food is going to be in Korea or maybe LA, and then the best French food is going to be in France, right? But what I do have is that for breakfast, I might eat like an American breakfast, Mexican lunch, and Chinese dinner. And I don't find that really in the other countries that I've visited. So I think that's a really, really beautiful thing. And I remember going to Italy with my wife on our honeymoon, and we had this amazing Capri salad. Or a very good Capri salad. I wouldn't say amazing, very good Capri salad. The ingredients were pristine. But in a sense, it was boring too, because it was just cheese, tomatoes, olive oil, balsamic, all great ingredients. But if this were in Chicago, I think that a chef would take this at this period of time and replace those tomatoes with really nice ripe peaches. And they can do that because they don't have this box that they're constricted to. Of like 300, 400, 500 years of this is what this salad is, you know. And so the story of our menu, our food, is us maturing in a sense, seeing what we grew up eating, what we've been exposed to, and not being afraid to put it out there. And it doesn't. The only paradigm, the only box that we need to break or try to achieve is that it tastes good, and that's what makes it special.
Is breaking out of the box something that is taught in school, or is that something a chef develops on his or her own after experience?
I think that's something that everybody who is young and going into profession feels like they have to achieve. Like, has this been done before? And like I'll often speak to young cooks, and they're like, okay, this is my dish, but I'm putting a twist on it. This is what makes it special. It's never been done before. And I tell them that the best way to go about making a good dish is think of your favorite things that you've ever ate in your life before. And my favorite dishes are not necessarily things that have this crazy spin on it that involves molecular gastronomy or some crazy new technique. It could be a simple slice of pizza, right? And so why does that make it special? Or why does that make it special? And it's they're just different flavor notes, right? And because of that, that's what, you don't need anything else. That's ultimately what you want to achieve. Does it taste good? And that in and of itself is special, because so much of the things that you eat every day are mundane, right? But if it tastes good and it lifts you out of that monotony, then you've achieved something.
Okay, so I take it that you think in terms of taste. You can think of ingredients and then that will generate your conception of the taste that you're going to put together. Is that correct? Is that how it would work?
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
Because the thing is, we're, as a cook, this is my profession. We're constantly, as any other human being, I'm 38 years old, so I've had 38 years of eating, but I've had in that 38 years, I've been working professionally as a cook for over 20 years. So that's consciously eating, right? And so constantly being exposed like that, you should have some familiarity with ingredients and see how those relationships work with one another.
Okay, so we've asked you to talk about a specific dish of yours, and you were kind enough to send over this photograph of a dish, which looks amazing.
That's a roasted pig's head. So
roasted what?
Pig's head.
Okay, so if you could just tell us how you came up with the idea for this and walk us through what it took to perfect it. What was the process that you created this?
Yeah, so this is one of our more recent dishes. This was in celebration of Lunar New Year, Chinese New Year. And
Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah. And so we decided to do a roasted pig's head. Every year, a little tongue-in-cheek, with Lunar New Year and Chinese New Year, there's an animal that signifies the year. This year it was pig, and so every year we try to do that animal and cook it. And so this year we did a roasted pig's head. And one of the things about that is the idea of sustainability. And also being a good cook. So one of the things I love about being in Chicago is that we have 4 seasons, and so that really changes our perspective of what is good to eat. But also the produce that we can get throughout the year changes, right? And so you might not be able to get the best produce in the dead of winter when nothing will grow, and that is what really challenges you as a cook. You have a great piece of Kobe or great filet mignon, all you do is sear it and you serve it up. You are a jerk or an asshole if you put more than that on that, because it's a pristine piece of meat. You don't have to do anything else than that. With a pig's head, you have to cook. You have to actually cook, right? And that's what I love about it, is that you have to take that thing that is, many people might look at it and be disgusted by it at first glance, right? And how do you make that into something that people will crave and is just a great experience? For us, we took that pig's head, we braised it, and we braised that for 12 hours overnight. Then we pull it out. Then we have to score the skin on the meat, so that because there's so much fat on the outer layers that if you don't score it, then it's going to be this gelatinous mess. You put it back in the oven. You allow it to crisp up. Then you pull it back out of the oven. Take off the ear. That ear you're going to have to fry in the fryer so that it gets really nice and crispy. And you're going to have to put that pig's head back into the oven again so that it crisps up again. So in terms of the cooking process for that, it's about 12, 14, maybe almost 18 hours of cooking, right? And at the end of the day, you're left with a piece of meat that is really crispy on the outside, beautiful braised meat on the inside, and you have different types of meat in there as well. You have the tongue, you have the pork cheek, and I think one of the wonderful things about it too is that that it is recognizable as still being an animal, right? I think in terms of food, if you're not vegetarian, like you have to understand that this food was a living animal at one point, and it's good to recognize that, right? Meat is not a vegetable, you know, even though it might seem that at the supermarket where it's all cleaned and fabricated and pristine, but I think it's very celebratory. It always shocks me when we do like a whole fish and we might get like a customer and they're like, can you remove the head? Can you remove the bones? And like, you know, it's still a fish, right? And and in a lot of Asian culture, like it's very celebratory to have that whole animal, to celebrate it. In this dish, like you have pork, and then in Korean culture, it's very common to have pork belly with oysters, which from maybe a French perspective makes no sense because the terroir is so different. Like pigs don't come from the ocean, but oysters do. But I think it's very celebratory because you're celebrating also like man's mastery of the earth. And it's like, I'm able to eat from the ocean, I'm able to eat from the land, and that's what this celebration is about. That's what this New Year's dinner is about.
So when you first made the pig's head, did it taste the way that you thought it would? Were you thinking of that a taste and then it's supposed to match what you had conceived, or did it surprise you and then you decide to go with something that maybe you did not expect?
We expected it to taste good. So I think we were able to reach about 80% of that, right? And then so from there we decided to score the meat so that the skin could crisp up a little bit more. So traditionally, tamales are made with pig's head. And so I know, having had tamales quite a bit, I know this meat's going to taste good. And so that expectation was already there, and it was easily met. Making it a little bit, getting it to the point that we wanted to took about 2 to 3 times. And so that was like scoring the skin. How much are we going to brine it so that the meat is a little bit more savory, which is what we did. We added some aromatics, and I think it was one of the things that was surprising was like how great the tongue was compared to the cheek, compared to like the skin. That was really revelatory.
Okay, so you mentioned taste, of course. One of the things we discussed in our design class is thinking about, is design something that is beyond the visual? And you've already mentioned sort of the texture of the pig's head, and I think aroma you've mentioned, and there's also umami, right? So, I mean, do you think of appealing to other senses beyond the taste when you're coming up with your dishes?
Visual is a huge component. Yeah, all of those factor in. Taste, smell. As a restaurant, we're talking about the ambiance as well. Ambiance, service. I think a lot of people say, "Oh, restaurants are so hard," right? And because it's like a tripod. You have 3 legs. You have the food, you have the ambiance, and you have the service. I don't know if restaurants are so much harder than any other profession. I'm sure every other profession believes their profession is very difficult as well. But being able to nail all those 3 things, and at the same time, I think it was Ferran Adrià who said that we bring maybe 20% of it. The other 80% is what does the guest bring. And so like if you come in there and you're fighting with your husband or your wife, it doesn't matter what I put out in front of you, it's going to taste bad, right? And so, but beyond that, are we able to make it so that people are able to sit down, enjoy themselves, and feel like they're taken care of. And part of that is when that food comes out, if I'm presenting it on a garbage lid, it doesn't matter. It's going to look horrible, right? If I put it on paper plates, if I don't respect the food, why would the guests respect it as well? And so the visual is huge, and smell is huge. That's going to hit them before they even see it. And if that host was rude to them before they came in, then it doesn't matter. They're gonna give me a bad Yelp review, right?
And that's something that you read?
I try not to read too much of them, So.
Does Vicky read it then?
Vicky, yes. My other partners read them. I especially try not to read them before service because I don't want to be too upset.
Okay. Can we just talk briefly about the menu? We've focused on a dish. How do you design the entire, set of offerings at your restaurant? Is there something about putting the combinations together, appetizers, main dishes, etc.?
So now it's easy because we have a set menu, and everything that we put in there is to fill in holes or gaps that we perceive there being. In the beginning, it is much more daunting, and you have this idea of, so with Mott, I want to capture this idea of a Chinese restaurant in a sense. And I don't mean like Chinese food, but I mean like when my parents would take me to a Chinese restaurant because I got all A's on my report card or something like that, right? And I want that experience of a whole fish hitting the table, a whole leg of lamb. That is one of the things where going from Ruxbin to Mott, we wanted to do a lot of dishes that were large format and get people to jump in and with their forks and knives and share with one another. So in the beginning, it's like, okay, that is that concept, and what do I need? And so in some ways it's easy, some ways it's difficult. Okay, I have a bunch of meats. Now I need some vegetables to offset that. I want some noodles. I want some rice. And so, we start off with a large concept, and then just start trying to fill in the holes afterwards.
Terrific. Okay, so we're going to get to questions soon. Maybe a couple of questions about intellectual property, since a lot of our students here study intellectual property. Let's just imagine somebody came to your restaurant for Chinese New Year and had this amazing pig's head dish, and went back to New York. This person was a chef, went back to New York, tried to make exactly the same dish, and let's say that chef did, and it was very successful in New York City. You have any problems with that? No.
If he were more successful than I was, then I would be jealous. But I'm not the first person to roast a pig's head or to make any certain dish. And like so many other dishes that my young cooks will come up to me and they think is this brand new idea, and I might think I came up with this crazy, amazing idea. Just Google it, and it's probably been done before. We stand so much on the shoulders of the people who have come before us, and we're so influenced by what we eat. And so that has happened before, where we have a dish and the ingredients are pretty specific, and there's another restaurant that does something very similar a few weeks later, and it's because maybe one of their cooks had come and ate at our restaurant. And to me, that's flattery. Some of my staff might be a little upset about it. I'm like, it's just, you should be honored by it. Maybe that's our reaction because there's nothing else that we can do about it. But I think more than anything, as long as you get a slight head nod of acknowledgement, then there's not anything to be too upset about.
Do you think other chefs share your view of pretty permissive copying of dishes?
The ones that, in terms of training and doing my apprenticeships, I think that's always been the prevailing idea, prevailing notion. Why does Thomas Keller or Charlie Schroeder come up with a book that has all the recipes in there? Part of it is because these dishes are so labor intensive to make that if you are willing to do it at home and you're able to be successful, then kudos to you. And my experience as a young cook was I would find that there were certain cooks that I would run into that only knew how to make a specific dish. Or not that they only knew how to make that, but this dish was theirs, and they would not teach anybody else to make it. They were very protective of it. And I found those people to be the worst cooks. Part of it is because when you're not willing to teach somebody else, you don't really understand what you're doing, and you can't grow. But also, if you're so protective of that one thing, then you are irreplaceable, right? But irreplaceable in a negative sense. Like, you'll always be that line cook. I can't take you off of that station because you're the only one who knows how to do it. But if you're willing to teach other people and you're good at what you do, then I can bring you up to the next level.
Okay. Just a couple of quick examples. There have been some recent attempts to use intellectual property to protect food. Here's an example of a shape of a burger that was granted preliminarily approval for registration by the U.S. Trademark Office. This Bubba burger, unusually, I don't know how unusual it is, but that's an interesting attempt to protect the shape of food. Mm-hmm. And then this case came from the EU, in which actually this Dutch company tried to claim copyright over taste of this so-called witch's cheese, but the court rejected it because one of the reasons why was that the court thought taste was too subjective and too hard to describe. So if there was copying, it's like, how are you going to prove that this tastes similar, et cetera, whatever. Do you have any reaction to these attempts by corporations to try to use intellectual property to protect food? Maybe not at a restaurant, but different aspects of food.
I think for the witch's cheese, I think the problem is that they're trying to copyright or patent flavor, right? If it were a formula, then I think that's different. But I think the court is right in saying that taste is so subjective. Even an individual's taste changes over time. Like what we like as children, as adults, and even as we grow older, what it was salty to us, sweet, too greasy, too oily, changes within one person. I also find, like, in our recipes that we make, like, a lot of times the recipes have to be adjusted because even if you follow them verbatim, you have two different cooks make it, it's going to taste a little different. And that might be because our formulas are not spot on, but we like to think that there is still that little bit of alchemy aspect to cooking. So I think with the witch's cheese, like, if they had like a very specific formula, I think, okay, maybe you can patent that, you know, as long as it's not like super obvious and not what everybody else is doing. I think the thing with the Bubba's burgers, where you have that shape that's so amorphous, I just worry that, okay, you can give a patent or copyright to that one shape, but then what if everybody starts patenting all these weird amorphous shapes, and then you have one cook who is making this burger and is freaking out. It's like, oh my gosh, am I breaking the law? Because this looks like this person's thing. You're opening up a big can of worms.
You're crowding out the burgers. By the way, Thrillist named Mott Street Burger is the best burger in Chicago. We thank Chef Kim for his fascinating discussion.